Today's event fits within the program of events that are related to our current exhibition, which is entitled Naturalist Notebooks. And that exhibition is on in the library until the 30th of September. So if you are in the vicinity of Piccadilly, please feel free to pop in and have a look. The exhibition is free, and we're open Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So the intriguing notebook that is going to be the subject of this Linnean lens did not quite make it into the exhibition, although we did hesitate, but this is because it's, as you will see, it's quite an odd one, and it didn't really fit within the remit of the exhibition. But because it's quite an extraordinary notebook, we decided to showcase it as part of this Linnean Lens series. And to talk about this notebook, which is a notebook of cartoons by Richard Owen, I'm delighted to welcome Leah Demetriou. Leah is an independent researcher and lecturer who specialises in mid-Victorian natural history, and her research interests surround the foundation of the Natural History Museum and, of course, its founder, Sir Richard Owen. She's particularly interested in the intersection between his scientific career and personal life. So over to you, Leah, to talk about Science and Satire, the remarkable cartoons of Richard Owen.
Thank you, Isabel, for the introduction, and let me see if I can get the screen sharing set up, shall I? Right, is that all right? Okay. So start off with a introduction about Richard Owen in particular, because obviously need a little bit of background on him before we get started. But he was born in 1804 in Lancaster, so he was northern. And basically, what you will mostly be familiar with Owen is most likely his association with coining the word dinosaur in 1842, and more than likely some of the controversies he's had surrounding his peer group, like Darwin coming out on the wrong side of the evolution debates, although that's kind of debatable in and of itself, as he did believe in transmutation, but that's neither here nor there for this. His career began in Lancaster, where he was apprenticed to a surgeon at the Lancaster jail, and was basically all set to become a doctor. He moved from Lancaster to London in the 1820s, starting a sort of semi-medical career in St. Bartholomew's Hospital before transitioning over to the Royal College of Surgeons, where he very quickly lost interest almost entirely in medicine and became the assistant curator to William Clift at the Hunterian Museum, which was an anatomical collection that was mostly medical in nature, but had a wide variety of natural history specimens as well. He then went on to forge a incredibly eminent scientific career over the course of the Victorian period, eventually leaving the Royal College of Surgeons in 1856 to work at the British Museum's Natural History collection, which was sort of falling into a bit of disrepair at the time. And he took it upon himself to stop that from happening. Most of the specimens were kept in a fairly sort of dingy basement sort of thing at the time, and were apparently kind of molding. But Owen then went on to think that they should be removed from the Bloomsbury location and taken to South Kensington, where the purpose-built building was obviously erected in 1881, and eventually all the specimens were entirely transferred by 1883, and that also marked Owen's retirement. He, to return to a little bit earlier in his career, before that, he at the Royal College of Surgeons was primarily involved with cataloguing initially, and a lot of the artistic stuff that you'll find from Owen is very scientific in nature, meticulous anatomical pencil drawings. But he did sort of enjoy doodling from time to time, but particularly, actually, hold on, to return to something I know is going to pop up on the slide, he had a somewhat contentious personality, and one of his colleagues, or enemies, not really sure how to categorize Huxley, said of him, Owen has been amazingly civil to me. He is a queer fish, more odd in appearance than ever, and more bland in manner. He is so frightfully polite that I never feel thoroughly at home with him, said Huxley of him in 1900, roughly 8 years after he died, so he never had to hear it. But he is sort of known for having a bit of a austere, stern personality, or at least that's how he's remembered. But if you start actually examining his personal life, you'll find that he had quite a lively sense of humor, particularly among his family and friends, and that starts as early as, or you start seeing that as early as his career at the Hunterian Museum. However, I'd like to turn attention to his brother-in-law for a moment, who has some absolutely fantastic drawings, which I think may have inspired some of the ones in this notebook. William Home Clift. So William Clift was the last pupil of John Hunter, who the Hunterian is named for, and his son was supposed to be the next curator of the museum, but unfortunately he died in a carriage accident off Chancery Lane in 1833, and Owen was there to take the position himself. But William Clift was known for doing quite a variety of colourful illustrations. And in the top right, well, here, this is apparently a glyptodon and a megatherium, although I don't think megatheriums really look like that at all. So this was a drawing done before Owen's monograph on the megatherium, which seems to have put things to rights, as actually the text in the top right next to Owen with his incredibly strange wand reads, but it's I don't think the text will come up on screen to where you can read it, but I have transcribed it. Above the skeleton it says, "You scoundrel, you've stolen my coat of mail," which is referring to the thing that looks a bit like a blanket on the megatherium. And the megatherium has said, "Indeed it was forced upon me," and Owen, coming in with his anatomical knowledge, has decreed, Owen sets it all to rights. So Owen did work on the glyptodon and the megatherium, and I think William Home Clift, who was the son of William Clift, was poking a little bit of fun at how much work he had done on both of these things. But Clift's illustrations permeate throughout personal correspondence, all sorts of things, and Owen and Clift worked in quite close quarters, so I wouldn't be surprised if he picked up the habit of doodling from him. And another person who does quite a lot of illustration, or like, unfortunately we don't have much record of this, but I do know that Caroline Amelia Owen, his wife and the sister of William Home Clift, also published a illustration of her own. Unfortunately, not a lot of original material from Caroline survives, but this rather good illustration, which was apparently published, though I haven't been able to find out where, but it was published around the 1830s. This is a satirical drawing depicting Catholic emancipation, apparently, although frankly, I'm sure somebody in the audience will know more than this about me, but I just really like how vibrant and lively her line work is, and she also shared in the sense of humor that seems to be quite prevalent in the family, which I think is rather sweet. Incidentally, Owen and Caroline first met when she had apparently fallen off a stool trying to hang up a curtain, and he just happened to be the only doctor in the vicinity at the time. They were engaged within that year, and then had a 7-year long engagement, 7 or 8, I can't quite remember, because he wasn't making enough money to satisfy her mother, and which is interesting because he was technically employed by her father, so it's fairly interesting. But Owen, generally, you'll find has quite a specific style of illustration. This is an example from the Natural History Museum, where I'm not entirely certain what he was looking at, but it's apparently a man who has gotten a bit caught in the rain. Based on the caption, it says, "Heavy rain, dull lookout." Another thing is observational sketches, which is more skewing towards the anatomical, but some from the 1830s that he took in Paris at the zoo attached to the Natural History Museum there, of elephants I find quite charming. This one says elephant picking up front view, although I'm not entirely certain what it's picking up. I haven't been able to identify that. And another one, which honestly may be the same elephant, of it in the pond, which I find quite fun. Another usage for these, which is not, I mean, again, this is mostly observational, is another one I found quite fun was during the Victorian period. A lot of people, there was a lot of increased sort of sightings of sea monsters and things around coming in from mariners, and it became quite a thing, quite a fad at the time. And Owen took it upon himself, because he wasn't really one to let a sort of scientific conundrum rest. He took it upon himself to try and come up with a more plausible explanation as to what people were seeing, what these sailors were seeing when they saw sort of things in the water that they took to be sea monsters. And I was quite delighted by this doodle, which I found in a large scrapbook of material relating to his sea serpent observations, which is a suggestion that it might have just been people seeing whales reproducing. And I think this is a particularly good drawing of it. Now, one thing about the actual sketchbook, that we're looking at, that will not show up on screen via the camera because it is so light, is this here, which is, well, you can't see it there either, but that's how light it is. It apparently belonged to Caroline at some point, as scribbled in there is Mrs. Owen, her book of cooks. And the way it's spelled, which looks more like it reads Boke of Cokes, is apparently, as far as I've been able to identify, a reference to the first recorded cookbook, which was under the same title and published in 1500 odd, sort of. But it looks like she had plans for this notebook, which was then very quickly commandeered by everybody else in the family to do anything else with, because this is incredibly light and it took a lot of fiddling with the exposure for me to even be able to see the text come up. But one thing I particularly like about this is if you look at the M on the first letter of Mrs., it's been turned into a little gargoyle. So I think it's supposed to evoke the sort of medieval idea of these very illuminated, complicated texts, and then they have entirely given up with the rest of the the rest of the statement down there. I can't figure out what's going on the E, but it kind of looks like a tap a little bit, something you could turn. But the M is definitely a little gargoyle, and I find that quite charming. Satirical cartoons and that sort of thing was very prevalent as well in the Victorian period. So I imagine a lot of people took it up as a hobby, particularly in the scientific community. And Owen himself was satirized quite frequently, actually. Is an illustration from Punch magazine showing a lecture of an eminent savant, and it is definitely depicting Owen. There is a reference where I believe Caroline refers to this illustration as particularly clever. And I think if you take a moment to look at all the different faces in the audience, it's really a lovely piece showing sort of the types of people that might have been going to scientific lectures around the time. What I find quite interesting as well is that there's clearly women in the audience, but I don't have a reference point to if this is depicting a particular event or if it's just something miscellaneous that was drawn to sort of show the customs of the time. But actually thinking about it, looking at the desk here, it reminds me of the one at the Royal Institute. And I do know that they occasionally permitted women in for lectures there, but I wouldn't know enough about it to make a definite statement, but it does look like it. On the right is a illustration of a quite ghostly looking Owen from the Sydney Punch from 1874, which is quite interesting because his reputation was sort of international enough that he was being illustrated in Sydney's copy of Punch, and apparently it was about this jawbone which had allegedly been broken at some stage, but turned up completely fine a bit later. But I think it's quite interesting to see how much of this sort of illustrative culture was really around at the time, and it permeated everything from, you know, sciences to just general news, because obviously like published photography was not really quite, particularly in newsletters, was not really quite so prevalent. And I mean, no, why would it be? But it's nice to see that Owen was kind of, you know, very prominent in those sort of things. Another illustrative style he tends to go for if he's not doing scientific illustration is these really, really nice watercolors. There is, I recall, a illustration of a orangutan, which is done in a very similar style, but this is of a church in Brussels. And let me, it won't show up as nicely on the camera, so I thought I would blow it up slightly larger here. But I'm just really fond of these very loose, quite, I don't know, the style of it I really appreciate, and I think it's as much as I don't have much information about the actual image, this particular one, I do think it's worth putting into a highlight. But to move over, I think about ready to switch to the camera, if that's right, because then we can have a look at the actual illustrations we're talking about now that we have a little background. So a couple of things, let me just get up and walk over here for a minute. A couple of things about this before I sort of start flicking around the illustrations is the rough date of this is about the 1860s, and you can tell, or something I was looking at when I was here first, is that if you hold some of the pages up to the light, one of the things that was common to do with Victorian paper was the manufacturers would add a watermark of the date of the paper's manufacture, which in this instance is 1859. So these things date from beyond 1859. And whilst it's likely an object that has been added to by many members of the Owen family because the handwriting differs. And I'd like to thank, if she's in the audience, Carolyn Schindler, for pointing that out to me on a recent phone call, because I hadn't realized that one of the illustrations in here has been signed by Owen's son, William Owen, who was their only child. But I was surprised I missed it, but I'm glad to know. So it's likely been added to by many members of the family because, again, handwriting differs, but anybody who was around after 1859. So it couldn't have been, for instance, William Home Clift, who was, you know, very known for these sort of doodles and drawings, because unfortunately he was dead at that point. But just to give you an example of how light that note from Caroline is, let me see. So light, in fact, I can't even see it now. Hold on. There we are. It's just here. And I don't think that picks up on the camera at all, but just a tiny bit of that text. So that's the E that I said had the sort of tap motif on it. But yeah, no, I was quite pleased to find that because it was an interesting little snippet that I hadn't realized. Now, I don't know a tremendous amount about the actual drawings themselves, but I'd just like to, I think they kind of speak for themselves in a way, and I would really recommend taking a moment just to have a look at how well done these ones are. This depicts a scene of a Frenchman visiting Britain for the first time, and one thing I think stands out very strongly in Owen's illustrations is the facial features that there are. They are incredibly expressive, just really gorgeous, and frankly I wish I could draw in a similar manner when I am, because I think they really do encapsulate a lot of emotion. Let me see if I can find the next page in this sequence, but is that all in frame? Cool. This is the hustle and bustle of a London street, for example, and it just captures so much. I don't know where to start with this, but my favorite little snippet is after our the protagonist has finished his sort of jaunt around London. He's quite horrified to discover how much his bill has been at the Grosvenor Hotel. Another example, let me turn to this one, is this here, which is the ballroom scraps. And I think this might be my favorite one of the illustrations here, because it is a fantastic satire of sort of ballroom culture at the time. Well, would you mind just getting that so I can point both my hands. But it takes us through a little scene at a ballroom, wherein you have the first man attending looking rather nervous, a bit awkward, and then people who are not wanted as the second image. Why they're not wanted, it's not entirely clear. And the reason this is my favorite is because of this particular figure here, who I remember flipping through this book and I saw him, and he looks quite decrepit, and it really amused me because I'd just like to know who Lord Decimus Fogey actually is. I imagine he's not a specific figure or like a particular person, but he looks like he must be based on something, based on the insistence of the text. It's in block capitals with three exclamation points. And I find it quite charming how these illustrations can kind of still be relevant in a way, or not necessarily relevant, but I find them probably about as funny as the people who were seeing it at the time did, even if they probably had a little bit more context that is now lost on us. And then in the next image, Mr. Smith arrives, whoever he may be, and the slightly put out looking musicians are another thing I really enjoy. And then Mr. Smith, another Mr. Smith, and Miss Codger, who looks really not very pleased to be there at all. So there's a consistent sort of sense of humor that you find in these, which is lacking from a lot of the other sort of more scientific work. And it's nice to see, I suppose, that people had hobbies still. Let me turn the page. There's another selection of the ballroom scraps here, wherein there is the lady who is too tired to dance, but who recovers in a rapid and unexpected manner when somebody she would prefer to dance with arrives. And then the gentleman who... I can't actually read that sentence there, but he has apparently taken too much lobster salad at supper, and that has prevented him from really engaging in anything, and instead has fallen over. But I really like how he's illustrated this woman's dress, just kind of engulfing her like a massive quilt. But there's just a lot to take from these, which I find incredibly charming. And let me flip to my next bookmark, which is another favorite of mine, which has something quite interesting about it. Hold on. There we go. It is the history of the art of war from the earliest ages. Now, take that out. These are, again, stylistically slightly different because he's trying to emulate a Egyptian style here, which I find, well, he actually, it's a slightly tangential information, but Owen visited Egypt 3 or 4 times during his life and really enjoyed it and had a bit of a kick for Egyptology in the 1860s, which makes me think that might have influenced this a little bit. But I think it's just really, really fantastic. And then, so it starts with the primitive age, and then the invention of weapons, and then of a deadly nature. Wherein this one chap has quite unceremoniously chopped off the other one's head with a spear and seems a bit surprised about it. And then the Egyptian, supposed to be Ramesses II, with with the bow and arrow, and I think that's quite a large knife in his hand. And then the Assyrian siege of cities with catapults and bows and arrows and that sort of thing. And it keeps from the Britons with their little... Is that a Shetland pony, actually? Yes. So it's the Britons with their Shetland pony against the Roman Empire. And then the Battle of Hastings by an eyewitness. It just has this very lovely sort of very light-hearted feel to it, which I think really gives you a sense of the personality of Owen and also his family, who have clearly added to this over time, and the general sort of, because I think these ones actually are done by somebody else from the first page. If I quickly flip back to this one, the style is slightly different, but it takes us through the sort of development of war history. And then my favorite part, and I really do hope this picks up on camera, is just on this page here, where somebody has gone in and added a portion that relates to the First World War. And obviously Owen dying in 1892, he wouldn't have been around for this whatsoever. But it obviously this book stayed in the family, and I just find it quite sweet that somebody came in, saw this old sequence, and thought, just add a bit more to it. I kind of wish they'd carried on a little more as well, actually, or finished this illustration, because it doesn't really show up on camera, but it's two soldiers manning a cannon and one of them standing in the foreground plugging his ears in preparation for the explosion. One illustration which also indicates, and I'd like to thank Carolyn Schindler for pointing this out to me as well, that indicates that this is multiple people using this sketchbook, is here. It's this illustration of a scene which I think is copied from something. I'm not entirely certain, but here in the corner it says WO January 15th, 1860, which is another indication of the date of the book itself. But WO refers to William Owen, their son, who Caroline and Owen's son, who clearly must have added to it, but he wasn't drawing directly in the page. This is pasted in. But and again, I think looks slightly stylistically different to some of the other illustrations in the book, but it's one I think it's really interesting. So they were clearly using this just as a general scrapbook. Now, those were the main ones I had talking points on, but I think it's worth just having a quick flip through the entire book, because it's worth looking at in its entirety. So I will go through quickly and show you all the pages, just because I thought it would be a shame only to pick out one or two things to talk about. But here's the French scene again, and I will continue on a little bit. Past ballroom scraps. And here is that lovely church watercolor, but which has again been done. This one's been done straight into the notebook. So I like to think this was either based on a memory or possibly from life. I'm not sure, but it's Brussels, 1868. Again, sort of dating the book to around the 1860s. And yeah, no, I'm quite pleased that I blew that up on the slides, actually, because you really don't get the full impression of how vibrant the colors are in person. And then these are sketches of Dover, which are, again, sort of actually one thing I notice as a through theme with all of these is that they're all quite based in travel or nautical things. So there's another series which is illustrations from I think it's a poem, The Ancient Mariner, which, do you know who did the blog post about that? Because somebody wrote a blog post about it. Sorry? Alex, okay. So there is a blog post on that, and I'll show these in a minute, which is goes into
there is a
more
blog
detail.
post on our, yes. Was it a blog or the Linnean? I think Will is on the case. He's going to put the
Sorry, I just remembered
he's going to put the link. Yes, it was by our archivist Alex Milne.
It'd be a shame not to highlight that, because it was a really good read, and it has a lot more information than I can give. But scenes of Dover where French tourists are sort of arriving in Britain, expecting the British population to look a bit more like that, and they turn out looking like normal people. But there's a lot of, oh, this one's interesting. It's a military poem, which again, I don't have a lot of detail on or a lot of knowledge about, but it's another one that I think looks drawn by a different person. The line width, particularly on some of these, is a lot smaller, and whilst that could be somebody using a different pen, I think the handwriting in this one differs from some of the other captions as well. And unfortunately, the one thing that seems to be consistent is that they're not adding a signature to these, which is a massive shame, because I would love to know who was responsible for what. And this is another one I particularly like. Unfortunately, the caption is in French. Owen, incidentally, his mother was I believe her family was Huguenot in nature, or at least, and he spoke fluent French because of this, although apparently with a bit of a British sort of sentence structure regardless, but he did nonetheless speak the language and visited France quite frequently.
Leah, that means tout le monde descend. That means everybody's getting off. Obviously, I think it's a train. Yeah.
Thank you. I should have asked you that in advance, really, but I didn't think about it. So that's another one, another sort of vaguely travel and nautical themed one, because I imagine they're getting off the boat from France to Britain. And these are, again, really different in tone from the other illustrations. Are these what appear to be copies of something, or it might actually be tied to the Ancient Mariner set of images, because there's a boat in the background here. But if we, and it continues, hold on, here as well, with this really, do you think we could turn this sideways so I can flip this one? Do you want to? This really lovely sort of jaunty looking boat. One thing about these that I appreciate is it doesn't really strive for realism too much like that. But the boat looks very, when I first saw this, it reminded me of a modern cartoon or something that would have been animated. It feels very animated and it feels very alive. And it's been gone over with watercolor. These little things are indicative of clouds, and most of this set has been. Now, I don't know much about the Ancient Mariner poem, so I would direct you again to the blog post, but these are depicting a sequence from that. And I just think they're absolutely lovely. And again, drawing attention to the sort of expressions going on. There's a seagull flying in, and in particular, this man here is sort of readying himself to attack it, because I believe they were, in the context of the poem, they were stranded without food. And then in the next image here, they have actually managed to shoot it. And you can see the culprit there with his little bow and arrow. Let me see if I can lift this up. Is that focusing okay? You can see him sort of clutching it to his chest there. And the amount of depth and dynamism that he manages to get into these illustrations, again, is something I really appreciate. And then it's intercepted with the Art of War. And if we go past that, there is another sequence from the Ancient Mariner at the end. And then it takes us back to this one by William Owen. And then that's it. They don't seem to have used the last few pages. But I think, oh, actually, I would like to draw a little bit of attention to the front of the book, because the gilt on it is beautiful. And the one thing I find quite interesting is, like, scrapbooking in concept was quite a large thing during the period. They would sell, or people would sell, sort of pre-made illustrations for usually young ladies to stick into scrapbooks. And I wonder if this might have been what the purpose of this book was initially, and then the family started sort of drawing in it instead. But that's purely speculation on my part. But do you think we could show the that part of it? Thank you. The back of it is equally, I mean, these parts have rubbed off a little bit, but imagining this is a new book with the gold really brilliantly shining is very pleasant. And then there's a little bit of, I don't know how well that's showing up, but you can see here the indents are not gilt on this side, but they are fairly visible. I just think it's a really, really lovely object, and I'm glad I've had the opportunity to sort of take everybody through it, even if it's not in a particularly academic manner. I think it's worth looking into what people were doing with their spare time, or what their families were doing, because we tend to examine figures like Owen and other scientists under a very purely academic lens, looking at, I'll leave that open on this page, looking at predominantly their academic work, but I think their family life, their relationship with the people around them, and those sort of things also give us a really big insight into their personality, because at the end of the day, they are people as much as anyone else were, and they weren't constantly tied to their desks. And I think this is a fantastic example, particularly knowing it's a collaborative work between him and the rest of the members of his family. Really, I like this piece a lot. I think this is one of my favorite things I've been able to see of his and his family's, and I'm very pleased I was able to show everybody. Thank you. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you so much for giving us a quick look through the object and some of your interpretation. I think I'm wondering how much is possible as well for it to inform us on Richard Owen's some of his personality, especially his sense of humor. So really useful. So there's a few questions in the Q&A. I Before I go into that, I'm just wondering if you think it might be possible for someone to go through and actually establish the dates a little bit more with a little bit more research. And I'm wondering if there's if it is possible to have a little bit more of a context, possibly, as to when in Owen's life they date from.
Okay, yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And whether how his life at the time, if the drawings are dated, obviously,
Yeah.
then how his life at the time can inform what he was actually sketching. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think the reason I sort of hold off on talking about the dates too much when I was looking at it is because I don't, besides from broadly the 1860s, I don't necessarily know when all the sketches
Yeah.
date from. There's the 1868 one, and I did have a look. I did try and see if he'd gone to Brussels at any point during that, and I couldn't find any information, but that doesn't mean he didn't. I What I would suggest doing, and what I have planned to have a look at doing, is maybe going through some correspondence to see if he has ever told anybody, I'm in this place, this is what I'm doing, because it does look like something he's either brought there or based on something else. But broadly, with the ones that are dated and the other ones, I think it's it seems a little more fantastical than contextual, although I suspect he's drawing more from his life more broadly than having these tied to any specific thing, because usually with some of the other examples from the sketchbooks that I showed at the beginning, they're usually taken from life if they are scientific in nature or supposed to be observing animal life in particular. Because one thing I noticed about Owen in my research with him is that he separates quite a lot. So his academic and scientific life stays one side, and a lot of his personal life stays the other. And there's not a lot of overlap between those things, which I can understand. I think a lot of people are like that. They want to leave work at work, and
Well,
entirely divorce
actually,
themselves with it.
it's funny you mentioned that, because
Mm,
there is a comment in there from Helen Peters.
mm.
Sorry for mispronouncing.
Oh yes, yes,
Um,
Helen, hi.
it says, "Thank you, Leah. I'm so glad that we were able to add to your
Mm,
research and presentation very recently with your William H. Cliff that you had at the beginning.
yes.
Your research made me think of Owen as the odd." In inverted commas, Jane Austen in relation to comical observation of society.
No, that's a good point. I think that's quite correct. I wonder, this is again pure speculation on my part. I wonder if him particularly having moved down from Lancaster to London, which are two culturally quite different places, I wonder if that sort of alienation maybe, because he did move when he was in his early 20s, might have informed this kind of slightly observational humor, I suppose I'd call it, where he's sort of making fun of people, particularly in the
Mm-hmm.
ballroom scraps scene. So you could well be right with that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Someone says, I'm sorry, there were not more close-ups on the small pictures.
Mm,
If we have time at the end, we can try this.
yep.
We are the camera is not that great. First of all, we can't move the camera because it would be too unstable. I think
Yeah.
attendees might feel slightly sick if we did. But we can try and move it up to the
Yeah,
camera
I'm happy to
towards
go
the
through.
end. We are aware that sometimes it's hard to see the detail, but
Yeah.
it's the material that we're.
I don't know it, because I did write the article on these. There's quite a few close-ups there. Is that because I know the back issues are available online, aren't they?
Yes, that
Of
was
the Linnean one.
on the Linnean, and
Yeah.
I think the back issues are available online. I
Yeah.
can see Will
Yeah.
is
Sorry, I'm making
is
you do
looking
all
for
these
it. So
things.
there is an article in our
Mm,
membership magazine, but once they're published, they go
yeah.
online. So Will
But
is
that
trying to
has,
find
yeah.
it, and there might be
There's
a
some
link in the
definitely
chat.
some closer up pictures of some of the illustrations there, but I am, if we do have time, I'm more than happy to sort of lift up a few of the pages. But it's, yeah, The
Yeah.
camera can't be moved, obviously.
There's a question on provenance
Hmm.
and how the Linnean Society acquired it. We basically got it from one of our fellows,
Yeah.
I think, who inherited it from, you know more than me, Leah, on this
Do I?
actually.
About
I
the
can't remember the name of the great granddaughter of.
Oh, yes, Miss Morley. I don't have a first name on her, but she gifted, from what I understand, she gifted the book to the Linnean Society, and she was a great granddaughter of Richard Owen, so it's definitely from the family and dates from the 1860s, as I said. But beyond that, I'm not entirely certain. It's a little muddy on the details, but it's definitely of the Owen family. I think maybe Carolyn Schindler may know more about this than me because she had quite a lot of information about it. So
So a few questions. Is
hmm
this so you mentioned some sketches that are at the Natural History
hmm
Museum. Are they mostly scientific illustrations?
yes.
How were they regarded? So this is the only sketchbook that you
hmm
know, or sketches that you know of Owen that are not scientific.
Um, in its entirety, yes, but the notebooks at the Natural History Museum, hold on, let me grab note my notes because I want to make sure I'm getting this right. So one of the ones that was at the Natural History Museum was that chap who had been caught in the rain, which is completely unscientific. So it looks like they were more stream of consciousness. He had these sort of pocket notebooks. There's I think about 15 of them at the NHM. They're so big, and it looks like they were something he would be keeping in his pocket. But there's a lot of doodles in there that aren't scientific. Quite a lot of them are just figures he's been seeing, and but they are predominantly were taken with him on excursions where he was making notes. So it's a lot of notes interspersed with other things. There's one in particular that I remember which documents exactly what weight he was in 1830, which was about 10 stone, incidentally, if I'm remembering right. There is some very basic math equations in there. It looks like it was just a sort of general notebook, and occasionally that included sort of more doodles and sketches that were completely non-scientific. It's just that the majority were. But this notebook in particular is a household object, so probably wouldn't have been he wouldn't have kept any of his scientific notes in it. But yes, most of them are. Most of the ones at the Natural History Museum are scientific, but some aren't. He seems to have just not really had much of a system.
Okay. And do we know whether his scientific illustrations were well regarded?
um Yes, I'm pretty sure they were, but because he illustrated, at least in collaboration with William Homeclift, the catalogues of the Hunterian Museum, and you would require quite a high level of skill in illustration for that. So yes, I believe they were highly regarded, but I couldn't give you an example of how they were received
Mm-hmm.
precisely, but I would hazard a assumption that they were.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Duncan Hawley has a note on the Ancient Mariner
Hmm.
illustration, actually. Um, he says, you showed an interesting illustration of Coleridge, an Ancient Mariner, which showed his interpretation of the scene of the mariner
Hmm.
encountering the ice. This is interesting in the context of Owen's ideas on glacial theory.
Mm.
He was a drifter rather than believer in land ice theory. The date is there for significant. Land ice theory had been around since 1840, and there were many converted to this by 1860, and the final evidence for Britain was in place by 1865.
Do you know what? That is interesting, and I had no idea. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you for turning up.
um, yes, and Elizabeth says it's an absolutely lovely book and does feel as it brings another side to Owen. I think we can stop here for the questions,
Hmm.
maybe in the next 5 minutes, and I'll keep an eye on the questions to see if
Okay.
there are any
Would you
more
like me
coming in.
to switch
Yeah,
over and
maybe we can
yeah,
go back
of
to
course.
full screen, and if you
Hmm.
want to try and,
I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I can
yeah.
get behind it and then lift some of these up. Is it focusing on the camera again? Thank you. Right. So, do you think we could unplug the phone for a second so I don't knock the wire with the side of the book if I'm picking it up? Thank you. Oh, sorry. But I'll go through some of these and see if we can have a closer view. But I mean, in particular, this one is very nice. Oh, that means I can do a close-up of this woman's face, which is one of my favorite things in this set of illustrations. She, let's see.
It looks very
It
disdainful.
says, dismal failure of Monsieur Lebrun in an attempt at flirtation with the lady at the bureau, which is just tremendously good. And striking and cheerful prospect from his bedroom window on the 7th floor, which is the massive knot of chimneys and smoke that you'd presumably see in London at the time. And oh, this one's quite good as well. I'm surprised I forgot I mentioned that. Thank you for asking to see these up close because I can call back an anecdote from this. But this is a an early elevator, and I remember seeing in some correspondence, I wouldn't be able to tell you where, Owen saying he felt slightly bemused by elevators in concept because they must have been quite new. And there we go. I'm not sure what this is referring to, but it's a little flyer, presumably the French man has picked up. And there he is there. I would like to, let me get to the next bit of this sequence.
While you're turning the page, someone's just made a comment saying Owen also commandeered Caroline's artistic skills for illustration. The day after their first wedding anniversary, he took her to task for not illustrating a wombat's brain to the level of quality which he desired.
Oh, that's true. She had to redo it, didn't she? I remember that. I believe that is a snippet that was in the I'll hold these up while I'm talking, but I believe that's a snippet that was in the biography by his grandson, which is a lot of it was informed from Caroline's diaries, which I'm fairly certain they shared, or at least he read, because there's quite a lot of remarks about him in those, which seem pointed, like he was supposed to read them and take something from them, because I remember one of them was just complaining about the fact that he'd been complaining that his shoes were slightly too small for too much of the day for her liking. So no, you're right. He did commandeer her skill.
And do you know whether he had any training as an illustrator or in drawing or?
Aside from formally, I'm not sure. Aside from having briefly thought about attending a heraldry school, I believe, when he was about 12, I don't think he had formal artistic training because he was educated at the Lancaster Free School, which I do not believe had any arts training, but I wouldn't be able to say for absolute certain. It'd be interesting to look into, though. I'd like to know. I think he may have been taught in part by William Clift and William Home Clift, maybe, particularly when he was hired by the Hunterian Museum to be the assistant curator, because that would have required quite a decent amount of artistic skill.
Yeah, someone points out that it's not a gull in the Ancient Mariner, but an albatross, which,
Yeah.
as all my colleagues will know in the collections team, we have discussed at length in previous
Do you know, when I was talking
times.
about it, I was like, I'm going to get this wrong. I can't remember if it's a gull or an albatross. So I'm glad somebody's pointed that out. This one's particularly good, I think. I like looking at the faces here.
And Helen has put, for anyone, I hope you can see it. If not, we can copy it and put in the chat the information about the Owen collection at the NHM.
Yes, please go and see it if you're interested.
Library.
It's fantastic.
I'll put it. Actually, yeah. I've just put it in the chat.
I hope these are showing up all right. I'm seeing a small preview, but I'm not sure. I'd like to go through the Art of War ones as well quickly, because I think they bear looking at a little closer. But yes, I did sort of expand on these a little bit more in the article which I wrote about a year ago. So that should be public, hopefully. And I think Will's put the link in the chat. Excellent. And so if you'd like to see any of these a bit more high quality, I would suggest reading it. And then see if we can get a little bit more of a close-up on this one. I really like the guy plugging his ears. I wish I know who drew this one in particular, because it's so it's so charming. All right, so I think we've got a couple more, and then we'll have actually been able to go through close-ups on the whole book. And here is the signature as well, which has the WO for William Owen. And then that's everything in there. I hope that was...
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Leah. I think we can leave it there. There's no more questions, and you've given us a great overview. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming in and taking the time to show us what is a very intriguing notebook. And as you've seen, everyone, Will has put some links on the chat where you can find more about this notebook, both in our catalogue and our various blogs and publication. So I just want to say a little bit about our upcoming events. As I said, the exhibition on naturalist notebooks is in the library until the 30th of September. You can find more events on our website. We have a guided walk through Wandsworth Common coming up on the 9th of July, as well as a talk on climate injustice on the 17th of July, and also a curator-led exhibition tour. So there's loads of our events coming up in July. We do take a break in August, and then our next Linnean Lens will be on Tuesday, the 9th of September, where I will be talking about a little manuscript that we do have in the exhibition that was written by Carl Linnaeus at the age of 22, and it's about classification of plants in 3 different regions of Sweden. So do join us for that. And I think that's all I had to say. So thank you again, Leah, and thank you everyone for joining us, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.